Welcome to day 5, week 3, or day 15 in the overall program. Today, we are going to come to the conclusion of our strategy week for exceeding expectations and what that plan looks like, and also to start to communicate that out and to begin to hold ourselves accountable. So just a refresher, we began this week working to anticipate what the expectations are, the gaps, the core challenges, etc., of our stakeholders, and some of those are career gatekeepers. And we also then did the exercise of seeking to understand what those things actually are and looking at the delta between the actual and what they are, and synthesizing what we learned from our investigation into some patterns by team and person and category based upon the types of questions that we were asking. We've gone through that process. You should have that grid, that synthesis of the information to now help to inform you to define ultimately the targets you're going to be working towards, which will allow you to generate those exemplary outcomes that we're looking to do, as well as to build your leadership brand because you are working towards those outcomes and how you're actually working towards them. So today, end of the week, culmination of this week, and one of the most important weeks in the program, the other weeks are important as well, but just a reminder, you can do all the other things, but if you're ultimately not directing, leading, visioning towards the right targets, it makes those things less consequential. So let's make sure to get those things right, invest the time here in this part of the program if it takes you a little bit longer than maybe other parts of the program. So what are we going to do? Basically, 3 things today. We're going to set the targets and we're going to align them to motivation. This truly helps us to define those targets. And then we're going to determine the adjustments we need to make to create the transformation. So what we're going to change in order to achieve the result in how we're working to make that result happen. And then finally, we're going to communicate out those adjustments. It's another opportunity to get feedback, as well as also to establish our leadership brand. These are the 3 things that we're going to be focused on today's conversation. So for setting our targets and aligning them to motivation, what are we looking for? We're looking for the highest probability of the largest success. Remember, the whole approach that we've been taking with motivation and accessibility is increasing the probability of completing the desired behavior. And the question is, well, what's the right behavior or behaviors we should be focusing on? And those are your targets and all the associated actions that you need to achieve in order to hit those targets. So it's going to be important to understand what's going to meet expectations, what's going to exceed expectations. Ultimately, we want to drive towards that. Which of these targets can I deploy sustained motivation with? Meaning the type of motivation that's innate in different forms to us, or which targets might I need to employ that transient motivation, so that hacking of my motivation in order to propel myself through the behavior. But ultimately, we're looking for this adjoining or this nexus of what exceeds and what am I highly motivated to do, because this increases the probability that we're going to achieve those large outcomes. So the first step in this process is to identify opportunities to exceed expectations through the outcomes. So through the selection of the targets. And we talked about some of this yesterday when we were discussing synthesis. So delving into this area, the first thing, what are the opportunities across categories and the individual outcomes? So looking at the rows, what were the opportunities to meet and exceed expectations for individuals and their teams? What were the opportunities to meet and exceed expectations in the different categories or combination of categories? What are the patterns that you see in this grid and the synthesis of the information? And how is that connected to the gaps, that maybe large gaps in the organization or core parts of the business? And what are the related challenges against the core and the gaps in the business? Like aligning to the core and to the gaps, understanding the challenges, and then looking at the patterns across people and teams and in different categories are going to help you to identify what the targets are that you should focus on from a meets and exceeds expectations. Ideally, you want things that are going to impact the core and resolve big gaps. You might think that you're taking on a target that could be quite amazing, could be visionary if you do it. The downside to that is if it's not connected to the core or any major gaps in the business, could be really difficult to sell, could take a lot of motivation, a lot of work to make it happen. And it's super risky, and that you don't know what the potential returns could be. So in that type of situation, you really need to weigh the risks there. So what's core to the business? What are the big gaps in the business and the challenges? And what are the patterns that you can explore working against, providing solutions for that align to the core and the major gaps? And then from those areas, like what would be expected, like to be delivered for your role? What would be an exceeding of those expectations, or that next level role? What would they be delivering against potential solutions? And for if the gaps in the core of the business, you want to take some additional steps. Looking beyond the core and the gaps and the challenges, looking at those exceed expectations columns, the information around meet expectations. What would you be expected to deliver there? Like, what are some of the potential solutions that align to the gaps and the core parts of the business? Look through that information to find the patterns, to identify the opportunities, and then get really pragmatic, and practical, bring it to life. And do that by what are 3 expectations, both for exceeds across the categories, that you can identify. Like, commit to finding 3, create 3 of them from your thought process here and from these steps. And then not only doing that at a category level, so finding 3 opportunities to exceed expectations across the categories, but also, can you identify at least 1 opportunity to exceed the expectations of an individual or a team? So looking at the rows. So we want to align to the core of the business, gaps in the business, the challenges that are there, the patterns in meeting and exceeding expectations for the role, and then committing to 3 at a category level, or identifying 3 at a category level, and working to identify 1 for each team or each person for the rows. So 3 for the columns, 1 for each of the rows. And this will help to give us an inventory of potential opportunities for exceeding expectations. Now let's move on to the next step. All right. So the next step is to take that inventory of potential opportunities to exceed expectations, and understanding out of those, what are you really motivated to do, right? So you've got the behavior, the B part. Now we're looking at the M part, the motivation. And of those things, what do you think you would innately be motivated to do? Like, looking back at the first week, the first habit, and motivation and sustained motivation, which of those things are really the essence that if you did them, they would be a good investment of your time in terms of quantity, but in terms of the quality of time that you could give, like Would you be in this flow state, or would it feel timeless when you did these things? Would the time quality be high? And to think about, when you're looking at these things, going a step deeper into habit one, like what things might you be intrinsically motivated to do? What might you naturally want to do because it's the type of thing that you naturally want to do? What would appear authentic to you? It doesn't mean that it's not challenging, but what's authentic? What if you know that if you deliver that, regardless of the fear or trying to protect yourself, if you delivered it, you would feel like that's core to who you are? What gives you an opportunity to create freedom for yourself through commitment, through taking charge of your own destiny, and understanding the levers that you have in place that you can control, that you can make that thing happen, because there's enough things within your control that you can make that happen, either through authority or influence. You can realize that outcome. Again, combining the targets, or the exceeding the expectation targets, with your motivation is going to make it more probable that you're going to achieve them. We're not looking to do all of these things, but we want to find the highest likelihood of success. So just to go a step deeper into this, review habit number one around our self-leadership, which enables us to lead others. Review the list of the outcomes. And then of those outcomes, the exceed expectations outcomes, which are you really connected with based upon those principles from week one, ideally in the sustained motivation bucket, and mark these, identify them, because these are things that if you work on, you will more likely achieve them than the other things on the list. So sometimes I get asked this question, and it's completely justified in my mind. You may not always be able to choose the things you could work on. If something is like a meets expectations for your role, you can't just simply say, I'm not gonna work on that. So you can pull on the different levers. So from a targeting standpoint, from a behavior standpoint, is there an opportunity to deprioritize that? Can you work with your manager to understand where that is in terms of a priority, and share what the things that you do want to prioritize in order to reduce the obligation of something that maybe you're not motivated intrinsically or innately to do. If you can't, then you need to start to ask yourself, well, how can I motivate myself to do this? And or how can I make it more accessible? So can you employ transient motivation? Can you hack yourself to get motivated? Can you look at a hell and heaven exercise to really understand the pain and pleasure of doing or not doing the work, and referring to that when you need the motivation? Can you break this thing up into smaller steps? So whatever the reason is that you feel demotivated, at least it's easier. And then understanding the steps to get there and what makes it easier makes you more motivated to do the work. So we've gone through the process of setting the targets and aligning them to our motivation. And when we do that, we increase the probability, and that helps us to more likely accomplish those expectations that we intend to exceed, and then to reflect that with our stakeholders, as well as some of those stakeholders who can hold the keys to our career. Now we're going to move on to the next step for today. And we're going to talk about determining the adjustments that we need to make to create the transformation. And this is another side of the value equation. So at the beginning of the program, we talked about value, and value exists in two forms. There's the value when people, clients, things use the things that you deliver and they derive outcomes from them. And then there's also the value that those people and things and teams get by the experience of working with you. And the adjustment piece focuses on some of the experience of working with you. And the data that helps to inform this in order to determine the types of adjustments to make to improve the experience of someone of working with someone in our role is the questions around the role's positive and negative impacts. The questions around how the role improves things for the stakeholder, the questions around accountability or the frequency of the communications, how and how often should someone in the role be held accountable to that stakeholder. These are key pieces of information on how to adjust the experience of working with you or working with someone in your role in order to create values in the engagement with someone in your role or with you in that role. So the emphasis of the first part, again, that was on the deliverables and when those deliverables get used and the value that it creates. And this, like looking at the adjustments, like understanding if someone prefers to be communicated via email and you've been talking with them in meetings and constantly asking for them for their time, but somebody in that role, they would just prefer an email from them. If you have that information, they'd like to get an email every couple of weeks just to be informed of what's happening. That's a crucial adjustment to make to provide a better experience with that person. So consider both sides of the value equation here in these first two steps and really tap into them by, in terms of the experience, using the adjustments to improve the experience with somebody in your role. And in terms of the use of deliverables and their outcomes and generating value from that, ultimately the targets that you're defining, and when you accomplish those targets, the deliverables they create and the value from the use of those deliverables. To go a little bit deeper into the adjustments, some practical steps that you can take across a few different data points. You can go by each row and determine the adjustments that you're going to make for the person to improve the working experience with you. I mentioned email versus meeting. Should you change the format? Should you communicate with a different degree of frequency? How do they prefer to be communicated with? Is there a certain style of content or certain types of information that they are seeking? Are there certain things that they need from you or your role that you haven't been providing that you could provide, that you should provide, and that you should consciously make an adjustment for? Something to consider. Additional data points. Did you see important themes in like the data that you collected that could be applicable to more people? Are there larger or single adjustments that could impact multiple pieces of the business or across multiple categories, multiple gaps, multiple parts of the core, and across multiple people? Look for those big wins against the targets with simple adjustments that could be applicable to multiple people, multiple parts of the business, multiple things that are required at the core or resolve the gaps. And doing this process of the individual and also in the categories, as well as understanding what could be applicable to most, should inform you on how you should do prioritization in terms of the adjustments that you're going to select and that you're going to focus on. So when you have the change that you're going to make, change could be simple, like a form of communication, or if you're working towards a target and that target seems to be big and could take a significant amount of time or would require many steps, you're going to need to break it down, right? You're going to need to create a plan in order to achieve that? What are the steps that you're going to get there? What is the order of the steps that you should take? And how do you focus on, if you've got a series of possible steps or things that you can do to achieve the target, focusing on the most accessible things to do increases the probability that you will achieve the target and the ultimate behavior that you're looking to accomplish. So again, think about in each step, what are you highly motivated to do? What can you motivate yourself to do? What can you make easier and more accessible by breaking it down? So and when we make these adjustments, we are representing that we're targeting the meets expectations, but ultimately leading towards the exceeds expectations. And that the purpose of defining the exceeds expectations for the role is that you know what to work towards, but you don't necessarily always need to communicate that you're working towards that. It's almost a bit of a surprise when you achieve it and you've already established with the stakeholder what they expect you would need, that someone in your role would need to do to exceed expectations. That's already been established. And when you hit those targets, you can remind them that I was able to exceed the expectations. We had talked about this and I've realized this target, it's now happened. We exceeded the expectations. So you're defining the rules of the game through your targeting and through your planning, and then you're actually making it happen. So what are some points around this? Again, you need to deliver meets for the role, but our goal is to exceed the expectations. In order to accomplish exceeding the expectations, you're going to need a step-by-step plan on how you will get there. And what are the methods that you're going to prioritize? What are the things that you have the most control over that will allow you to achieve that target? Again, the accessibility piece. And you're going to want to hold yourself accountable. With each of these steps that you want to take, what's your desired date of completion? When are you going to get it done by? And this is a good accountability mechanism for you to hit the different steps that you're going to be defining. Now, it can often be ambiguous when you think about the first step and then trying to get the last step. So going from A to B. A more productive approach is to start with the goal and to work backwards and breaking out steps into smaller and smaller steps. And as you do that, number one, you're getting rid of the ambiguity, and the ambiguity can foster demotivation. So bringing clarity can help to motivate because it seems more attainable that you can do what you're laying out. And you could also include a plethora of steps or options or different pathways to get to the end results, and then pick the opportunities that are most accessible to you based upon what we talked about during our discussion with accessibility. And this approach will help you to maximize the delivery or the implementation of this specific target as part of your overall strategy. So the final step is now to really bake in your accountability. It's to make that commitment and then to communicate out those adjustments. So you need to think about it in terms of being grateful. These people, they gave you 30 to 60 minutes of their time that maybe they normally don't give to you. They provided you a wealth of information that is going to help transform your career, especially, and also your leadership capability, especially when you iterate and you keep on applying this approach. You now need to communicate back to these people and to hold yourself accountable. So the first thing is to do is create some type of resource for yourself. This could be a comms doc, Word doc, Google Doc, whatever it is, but a comms doc where you maintain the history of the major communications that you're sending out. So you can refer back to these documents, either to understand the journey of any particular target, as well as to understand accomplishments that you may have achieved that align to exceeding expectations and that you want to refer back to, like, let's say when you're doing something for your own performance management. It can also be a spreadsheet, whatever format that works best for you. You want to have a history of the major communications. And this major communication for each person is, number one, you're going to let them know the adjustments that you intend to make to meet their expectations. So you're acknowledging that you listened to them, you're acknowledging that you heard some things that need to be changed for someone in your role. You're taking ownership and leadership that you're going to make the adjustments, and you're committing to the adjustments by communicating out to them that you're going to do them. And this is also another opportunity to build your leadership brand, because when you send out the adjustments, you could ask them to see if they have any further feedback, or maybe they can help to clarify the adjustments that you need to make or the targets that you're pursuing. It's another opportunity to make sure what you're doing is aligned, while also improving the experience of working with you as a leader. And based upon the information that they shared with you, you should know if you should be talking about this in an email or in a meeting. So decide the best format for each of these individuals in the rows, your interviewees, and then reach out to them and to communicate with them and ask for further feedback. So we're at our action item. It's time to act. The first thing to do is just to take a small step. So in the program today, I talked about finding at least 3 at category level, and for each team member or team to find one exceeds expectation. And so looking at your grid, pick one, one exceeds expectations outcome, and the associated adjustments around in order to exceed those expectations or to meet the expectations, and map it out. The accountability exercise will help you to do that. And then I strongly recommend to conclude the behavior and communicate it out to the person or persons, and ask for the feedback on the adjustments, articulate the adjustments, ask for the feedback and the appropriate mediums that each person desires to be communicated in. All right, so we spent this entire week focused on strategy. There was a lot that we covered today. And when we look at what leadership is out of the multitude of definitions, this is all about the totality of the goals that we're picking and clearly defining what those are and the decisions that we make or the adjustments that we make around them, how we're going to get there to achieve like those targeted outcomes that we're seeking. Make sure we're defining the right targets, that putting all of that work behind, all of that experience of working with us behind, and break this out in smaller pieces, right? It could be ambiguous, it could be huge when you look at exceeds expectation and you're like, how do I do that? Just break it out in smaller steps. Make it more accessible to you. Look at the smaller steps. Are there options for achieving that particular milestone? Are there certain options that you might be more motivated to do that you might have more control over, either through authority or influence? Just look through the entire process of getting to that outcome and go, how can I make this easier? How can I make this more motivated? And you will increase the probability of making that exceeds expectations outcome more likely. With that, this was a crucial week. If anything's not clear with you, feel free to ask questions. in the community, and just get concrete on defining your targets. Again, I can't stress this enough, how crucial it is to do this. You're going to look at your overall goals, the different roles and the aspirations that you have for yourself, because it's like crucial in understanding your motivation. We looked at what it means to anticipate what the expectations be of our stakeholders and potentially career gatekeepers. That introduced a series of questions, which then informed much of the rest of the week. And then the next day, we brought that anticipation into reality by seeking to understand the expectations. So going out into the field, asking the questions, getting the data, representing our leadership and building a brand by the experience. Hey, you're probably one of only a few people in the organization that's doing something like this. Then when you're getting the information, synthesizing it into patterns by category, by team and person, to help inform an inventory of opportunities or targets for you to focus on. And then the selection of the targets, like defining them, selecting them based upon, is it aligned to the core? Is it a huge gap? What is the gap? What are the challenges around that? What does meet and exceeds expectations look like in these areas? What's happening across multiple teams? What's happening across multiple categories? What am I most motivated to do from a sustained standpoint? What am I most motivated to do? Or what do I got to hack myself to do? What is something that I have to do regardless of how motivated I am, and how do I approach that? How do I make that more accessible? And then what are the adjustments that I need to make once I've checked that box on highly motivated, biggest gap, aligned to the core, there are exceeds expectations opportunities here. What am I most motivated to do, and how do I break that out into smaller steps to make it like more real, more practical, more achievable, easier to do, so that I am most likely or most probable to do all the behaviors and achieve the outcome that I seek, that I've targeted from an exceeds expectations standpoint. Next week, we're going to move on to the execution of all of this on your strategy. Looking forward to that. Again, please take the time to review this. This is going to be crucial to your development as a leader. All right, I will see you tomorrow.